Good morning, everybody from AppGuard. This is Neal, Conlon, Global Head of Business Development and Sales and Senior Vice President. We'll give everybody another minute or so to log in. I'm seeing a bunch of folks log in right now to our monthly webinar series. For anybody who is new to this webinar series, we started this webinar series back in July based on a need in the cybersecurity industry. We also do a webinar, which is more of a technical demo of how AppGuard software works once a month, which is more obviously sales focused. The purpose of this webinar is really to pull from a knowledge base of industry leaders and to really share some of the active concerns in this ever-evolving industry of cybersecurity. In my former role, before joining AppGuard, I spent a year traveling around the globe, meeting with CISOs, and I was thrown off by the amount of disparity and knowledge, both in technical understanding and methodology perspectives as well. So this has been a fantastically attended event. We typically have a couple hundred people, as we will have today. We have partners, customers, and industry leaders from all over the world. I just want to mention some of the folks. We've got folks from Fujitsu. We've got folks from Bank of America, Verizon, Gartner, Chicago Mercantile Exchange, just to show you the value and the type of people who are interested in these type of conversations. There is a thirst for knowledge out there as we continue to go through this path. Today's topic is going to be why adapt when you can protect, and how we can address the gap in server protection. We have our CTO, Fatih. Fatih, say hello.
Hello.
Fatih is here today. He's been on a bunch of these. We also have Bob Bigman, who is a very world-renowned cyber consultant around the globe, who will speak about this as well. So in preparation for this event and for all these webinars, I do a bunch of research, and I have to admit, of all the events that we've covered, from state nations to the Chinese hardware hack to the Marriott breach, just to name a few, I'm actually a little concerned on this one. So just to give you some metrics here, between 2017 and 2018. 2,912 enterprise insurance cyber claims were filed against where servers were the direct cause of that claim. That's not involving any other ones that were mentioned. And with that amount of cyber insurance claims, these are all enterprise accounts because you have to be a company of a certain size in order to file an insurance claim, and go through that process. I tried to compare that to a lot of Gartner and Forrester's research, and it just doesn't seem right to me that there's that many insurance claims for cyber being filed, and there's not a lot of research or ownership or accountability taken on there. So, Bob, let me go to you for a second here, right? So I think that, folks have agreed there is a challenge in the world of the endpoint. There's a second challenge right there of cutting through the BS of the buzzwords for what works and what doesn't. And then there's all these other kind of vulnerability points that I think we've addressed. How can we, either take a zero trust approach to it, or how can we use defense in depth? But outside of like honeypots and a couple other scanning type of solutions, how big of a problem are we dealing with on the server side, and what are some of the vulnerabilities people need to be aware of?
Well, thank you. First, up front, to answer your question, the server problem is massive. I hear hackers talking all the time about their reconnaissance work against various organizations, both public and private, and how they're targeting corporate servers. And the reason they target corporate servers is, well, that's where the data is. Whether it's stored on file systems or databases, or has pointers to other file systems, whether those servers are real, sitting in the physical on-prem, or up in the cloud service. It's still today where corporate America, public and private, I guess, store their data, and that's the target. We hear a lot of focus, as you mentioned, on clients, and when people talk endpoints, I think just through human nature they just think clients, but they tend never to think about servers. The other problem you see is, although cyber seems to work really well with the people doing endpoint security, they don't seem to work really well with the people who manage servers. It's a different part of the organization, or it's not managed by any central organization at all. And servers seem to be the the stepchild of cybersecurity protection. I mentioned why it's important. What I see is horribly configured server security configurations. Microsoft actually publishes a fairly good baseline security product that helps you secure their server. I've used this tool myself in about 30, 40 odd organizations to see how they're configured and see how close they come. And I'll be honest with you, no one's even in the ballpark. Even people who tried to use it find that over time it gets turned off by various people with privileges so they can make certain software work. The server environment is just, it's really kind of the unspoken stepchild that no one pays attention to. And it's oxymoron. I mean, it's incredible, ironic in that that's where the data's stored. All the malware hacks we see that go against clients run against servers. You escalate privileges to get into AD for the sole reason so you can get to those servers. So obviously, server protection is paramount. But to answer your question, I don't see it done well at all, almost anywhere.
Right. No, and again, I make sure, right, my promise to anybody that joins these webinars is that we will always bring a wealth of knowledge and a bunch of research to any of the comments that we make. And I found the same exact thing in my research. And even in looking at, again, this number of 2,912 is kind of my foundation metric here, because I can't believe that happens. People are filing this much, like filing for millions of dollars in premiums. And then on top of that, 68% of the breaches took months or longer to discover. So it's like, how long is the breach sitting on the server, and employees and just your average everyday employee in your organization is continuing to upload personal information, transactional information, IP, and it's just kind of being breached and floating out of the server, before they even realize that it's going on, right?
I mean, the most famous attack, I think, the most famous financial attack of all time took place against a server, which was the Swift attack against back-end Oracle databases, which sat on Linux servers. In all cases, the Linux servers and the Windows servers were completely unprotected.
I remember when that happened. That's a global infrastructure that every bank is dependent on. I mean, that just shows the complexity of the problem and the complexity of the solution. And I would say, and I'll push this back over to you, Bob, because I'd love to get your feedback. But it looks like every company that I looked at that has been in this business for a couple of years, really has sincere intentions, right? But they're taking a desktop solution that is meant to protect an endpoint, and they're trying to not start from square one and trying to build some kind of adaptation that kind of creates a quasi perimeter defense over a server. And the example I would use is, if we built a 3-foot steel wall and it was able to protect an endpoint, and they said, well, shoot, there's a place over here that is vulnerable, that is much more complex and much, much bigger. They took that wall and just built a wood fence around it, and then just slapped a logo on it and said, this is going to give you the exact same quality of protection. Is that what you kind of garner from what's going on in the industry as well?
Well, I don't think it's as much that as it is, frankly, the way most organizations manage systems and servers and clients. The server group is some obscure collection of people sitting behind a different office somewhere or outsourced somewhere. And a lot of times I find even the business units themselves manage some of their own servers on the network. So yes, server management is a little bit more complicated, but not so complicated that organizations shouldn't have a good handle on them from an asset inventory perspective and then be able to properly secure them. I honestly don't know exactly why I run into this problem all the time, but I just know that that I do. And the best organizations I found might have some IDS, intrusion detection, they mostly have malware prevention, but they don't realize that these servers are the target of really, really sophisticated kernel-based attacks largely, and need better protection.
Right. No, and let me just pause there for 1 second, because I see a couple of questions coming in. For the folks on the call, absolutely, if you have questions along the way and specific questions, please do type them into the chat. We've got somebody monitoring that. We will do our best job to either field those questions live on this webinar, or if it is a deeper and more complex question, we will definitely take it offline and get back to you with those answers. You raised a very interesting point, right? Where you're going in as a cyber consultant, you're identifying, infrastructures or architectures that they're just not getting it right, and then it becomes, well, great. Identifying the problem is the easiest thing in the world for people to do, right? As humans, we love to identify problems. Identifying solutions is a little bit harder, and I think that's exactly what happened, and that is how AppGuard Server kind of was manifested, right? It was actually brought to us by a client who had this problem and said, your software works really, really well on an endpoint, but what about this server version of it, right? Like how do we do that? Can you guys just adapt what you're doing here and bring it over to this point? And we actually took a very different approach to it. And this is one of the things I find very compelling about getting to work with Fatih, is that we look at this from a very next generation futuristic solution perspective, because if we solve this problem now with hackers and, for lack of a better word, the bad guys out there coming up with countermeasures, in 6 months, a year, they're going to come up with a countermeasure that defeats that solution. And so therefore, we started to work from the ground up and turn around and start to build what is now AppGuard Server. We also wanted to align that with what we philosophically believe is a zero trust kind of approach, where we just don't trust anything coming in, any of the applications coming in, any of the executables coming in, which makes it much more compelling. And we are not adapting to our existing software. We built this, which you'll hear about in a couple seconds, from Fatih, about how we kind of built that from the ground up. And again, if anyone has any questions on any of the slides that we're throwing on the screen, please feel free to mention that in our chat, and we will make sure to grab a hold of those questions as best we could. So Fatih, I want to turn this over to you for a second, because I noticed that there's a bunch of technical folks on the call, and so I wanted you to just highlight through the couple slides here what you think are the most compelling points of AppGuard Server and why AppGuard Server works.
Thank you. When we design AppGuard Server, as mentioned before, we take a look at what is desktop and what is server. And there are major differences between the two platforms. It would have been very easy for us to take the desktop version and just slap onto server, and then we would have the product. But we took a completely different approach by working with some of our partners in this area who have been exposed to some major attacks. And we working with them, we started developing this product, and finally we deliver for Windows. Why we are different? The goal here is that there are certain attacks that Bob mentioned, privilege escalation. At the end of the day, the adversaries like to pivot on servers and then do lateral moves. We make sure that when that kind of attack takes place, we are defending the servers from lateral moves. We have the capabilities for restricting built-in tools that are used by adversaries to attack the enterprises. These tools are built into Windows by Microsoft and administrative tools. Some of them are scripts. They use WMI interfaces. So what AppGuard Server does is to establish some form of protocols around these. And with our context-driven launch, we have the ability to control what can run and how without being whitelisting, without dealing with the hashes or IOCs. I will demonstrate to you later on in a comparative chart. We have the ability, when a privilege escalation takes place, to demote certain rights on the processes. This is our very unique capability that is effectively defending servers at this moment. And we enable the system maintenance using certain regions in the system with the context-driven launch combination with the privilege demotion. We have the ability to defend Windows servers.
So Fatih, I mean, you're going to get into the specifics here, right? As one of the things, if I go back to kind of my military strategy training, I always think about how the bad guy can get into the infrastructure, right? And I think that the complexity there, that even from my research, is that there are multiple vectors on the endpoint where a malicious event or a malicious person can get in. And then on the server side, we're talking about a much more complex amount of vectors that people are able to get access and exposure to for different reasons. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that if somebody's, and I'll use a metaphor here, putting cameras, which I guess we could call scanning, locks, and all kinds of things on the front door, and even putting honeypots around it to distract people as they're coming through the door. The idea here is that we need to have that same level of security and a full 360 around the entire house, so that somebody can't even just take a chainsaw and cut open the door and come walking in the door and get access to it from some other perspective. Right?
That is absolutely right. In addition, as you mentioned, many of the servers, unlike desktops, do not need to be protected by firewalls and IDS and IPS. They are not necessarily inside your enterprise. You may still put IDS and IPS, but they are not really effective, as has been the case with high-level attacks. So these are facing on internet, open to internet. You have web application servers. You have SQL servers, database servers running behind these web applications. And web applications are vulnerable, and they can be exploited and become a vehicle for someone to pivot on the server and start making lateral moves. That is what we designed this system from ground up. I want to differentiate our approach with the traditional approaches that you are very familiar with, that traditional AV, including so-called machine learning AV, AI AV, which is another form of signatures, but in the form of different signatures. And some companies have elected to deploy EDR. The problem with these solutions, like in the case of EDR, that it is a reactive, and if you are lucky, you will be able to detect maybe months, as Verizon report indicated in their last report. 68% of the breaches takes more than 6 months to even detect. So our approach is very different. We don't rely on AppGuard Server, does not rely on any form of IOCs or signatures. This is an additional benefit because now the other products, when they need to scan something or detect something, they have to upload to their cloud infrastructure. As a result, there are IP leaks will take place. With the AppGuard Server, your organization is protected because there is no cloud connectivity for our product to work, or any form of exposure of your IP to outside world, because there's no scanning or there's no delivering a file or any other script back into the cloud infrastructure of the vendor. Lack of IOC feeds, lack of detection versus being protection. These are the capabilities AppGuard Server delivers. One other capability is that as a server, you do not want to interrupt your operations. You cannot just put traditional products that scans. If you are running on the cloud environment, I/O operations, IOPS is very critical. And we wanted to make sure that the AppGuard server does not create additional workload on the servers, adversely affecting the performance. So there's no IOPS penalty as a result of this what we call isolation technology. And also is a very low administration. You don't have to deal with the whitelisting maintenance, which is a nightmare, as you know, and very light footprint. So working at the kernel level with a application layer with a couple of megabytes on the max, and without any kind of scanning, without creating any kind of stress on the I/O system, that is how AppGuard Server differs from alternative traditional solutions that has been very much like migrated from desktop, moved to the server platforms.
Gotcha. And for the folks on the call, I would say, again, we're gonna send this PowerPoint out to everybody, but I would love to get some feedback, especially from some of the folks that are on that this is their 5th or 6th time joining us. I'd like to hear some feedback as far as what they think as far as our functionalities are. Do these address some of your challenges? Do these address some of your concerns? And if they don't, I would love to hear that feedback as well. And we're going to be putting together some blog materials, and we're happy to feature people for giving their collaborative feedback. So I know, Fatih, you're going to go a little bit deeper into here as to why it works and speak about some specifics. But Bob, I wanted to go back over to you for a second, and based on what Fatih has shared with us, from your 40,000-foot view all the way down to the kind of microscopic view of getting into the infrastructure, how does that align with some of the concerns that you're seeing out in the world today?
Yeah, I think he's right on, hit the nail on the head. Specifically, the concern that a lot of companies have these days, they'll put things on clients because clients are where users sit, and frankly, no one cares about the users. IT people only care about the servers and the programs that run on them, and they're really concerned about performance. And one of the reasons, although I think it's an excuse, but one of the reasons they've been resistant to installing security software like IDS even and malware is the impact on performance, because frankly, no IT organization is really good at measuring out into the future what their performance requirements are going to be. So they've been resistant. So his points are absolutely right on.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful, and I caveat that. All right, Fatih. So why does AppGuard Server work?
So AppGuard Server delivers various defenses, as you in your example alluded. One of them is that privilege escalation prevention. When this privilege is escalated, we have as I mentioned before, we put into the lowest common denominator mode with our context-based launch technology. And attacks like credential theft, scraping memory, poisoning running services are defeated out of the box. Those are the critical elements of this defense. We also emphasize in AppGuard Server preventing lateral moves type of attacks, attacks that widely used in the form of PowerShell, RDP, attacks like NotPetya goes and install remote services on remote servers, and then become persistent, and remote code execution. And of course, the reverse shell, opening reverse shells is very, very common in many of these type of attacks to be able to control that. these type of attacks out of the box are defeated. There are attacks that goes and, for instance, hijacks vulnerable web applications and plant some binary code. In the case of Windows, this could be a DLL, or it can be some kind of unauthorized script. That is what AppGuard Server defends against. It's called digital binary planting. Out of the box, today, the AppGuard Server for Windows recognizes the presence of SQL Server, presence of IIS, and then creates out-of-the-box dynamic policies and then enforces those. And those are very effectively defending against SQL injection attacks going and hijacking the server. Again, we do not protect, AppGuard Server does not protect web application vulnerabilities, but when that web application vulnerability goes and tries to exploit the system, pivot in the system, that is where AppGuard Server takes effect and defends the underlying server host. And I mentioned to you before the ability to cripple privilege escalation type of attacks by default low privilege. Again, all these without the penalty of IOCs, without the penalty of trying to detect and then as a result result into false positives in the systems that are very common in many of the AI machine learning type of products that you are very familiar with.
So Fatih, let me just jump in there for 1 second. We do have a question, but it ties into kind of what you're talking about. I think one of the things that I see people really having to struggle with, both from the enterprise all the way down to a small organization, is security at any level is very, very expensive, right? And at some point there has to be some kind of compromise. And the compromise, the three buckets that I refer to often is we either need to compromise the efficiency of our processes, the efficiency of our resources, meaning how many people does it take to manage it, or we can compromise the cost because at some point it will become more expensive for us to manage than the thing we're actually trying to protect. And so depending on what level of security people are looking for, at some point you have to compromise those things. The biggest challenge, I think, is that if I have to give up, and I'm tying the question in that Shane asked into this directly, if I have to provide a better level of security, but I have to give up things like latency, speed, more agents on the endpoint, slowing down the entire infrastructure. I know that our endpoint solution is built to be very, very lightweight. For how does that align with AppGuard Server? Does AppGuard Server going to create latency on the infrastructure, or how does that work?
Yes, as I mentioned, we made sure that we do not adversely affect, as an AppGuard Server product, the underlying infrastructure, underlying server's performance. That's why our solution is very, very different and unique. It's a preventive security without scanning, without closing I/O operations, without creating memory, or in the case of EDR, I/O storms, basically. AppGuard does not scan, does not rely on IOCs, its footprint is in the order of, total footprint is in the order of a couple of megabytes. We are talking about megabytes, not IOCs taking gigabytes of your disk space. On top of it, every action needs to be scanned and resulting in the IOPS. AppGuard does not create that sort of penalties. That's why it is very attractive, very low the impact on the performance compared to our competition. On top of it, it does not require update. It does not require IOC. There are products in the market we are very aware of. Every so often needs to be adapted based on the type of attacks coming in. Their footprint needs to be updated. AppGuard does not require that sort of. You can leave that the agent for years. You don't need the type of IOCs. You don't need adaptation of algorithms, therefore adaptation of your agent. It is design from ground up performance in mind, because you cannot afford to impact performance on the servers. If you are talking about yet another agent, you are talking about an agent that has literally zero impact on the servers.
Great. No, and I think that I want to tie that in. So I'll even share that we've got some interesting conversations going on with U.S. government folks about for servers that are being deployed in far off locations where they cannot possibly take another minute of the battery out of the server because they're deployed for long periods of time. That they are very interested in the concept of putting AppGuard Server on top of these servers that sit off and are not going to get updated anytime soon. They also can't pull off the battery, and they can't definitely mess with the processing time. So, Shane, thank you very much for that question, actually. On another question just came in from Simone Sloan, and this ties exactly into kind of the next slide. How does this differ, Fatih, from McAfee and Norton? And this is not me throwing into the mix names of our competitors. To be honest, this is just a question that was asked by somebody, just to be very candid and transparent. But compared to other solutions out there like McAfee and Norton, how do we compare to the alternatives?
Without naming any of these, I will categorize them more like a traditional AV products, traditional HIPs in some cases. In those products, I think the biggest impact is that you have to scan. On top of it, you have to rely on signatures. AppGuard Server does not require signatures. It's not a detection. It is a preventive tool. It doesn't even detect whether there's a malware or not. It stops actions that are not supposed to be taken and reports them. And majority of those actions, having been 0 day, will not even have signatures. So the solution is very different from AV-based solutions, very different from, if you are also referring to some of the whitelisting implementation, it is very different than whitelisting, because in the case of whitelisting, processes can still be poisoned. AppGuard prevents poisoning of the processes. So your whitelisted, well-trusted processes, when they become, when they start running on the system, they are susceptible for attacks, memory poisoning, code poisoning. AppGuard defends against those type of attacks as well.
This is Bob Bigman. Let me make one comment on that as well. Fatih's being too nice. Let me mention something. When you think about McAfee and Symantec and all the other signature-based systems, the virus writers all over the world use a product called VirusTotal up on the internet and test all their malware against the signature-based malware tools. Chances are the one that your organization is going to see is one that they developed that was specific to that environment and was not found in VirusTotal. So you have to be very careful when applying these highly commercial tools that are signature based.
Completely. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest challenges is that, and this is about cutting through what really happens out there in the world, is there are products on the market that were developed to solve a specific problem. And that problem was solved very, very quickly. And then within 6 months, 8 months, year, the problem changed significantly. The malicious folks that are out there adapted either faster, better, or quicker than the next solution could be created. And I think the term that I've heard Fatih use a couple of times is future-proof, which is that not only will AppGuard products prevent existing known but also unknown attacks from happening. And so what are some of the other things, Fatih, that folks need to know about AppGuard Server?
Just want to mention today is available, and we released this product on 2008 R2, Windows Server 2008 R2, Windows Server 2012 R2, 2016, and 2019. This product also, as I mentioned, auto detects the presence of IIS for web applications and a SQL Server and adapt the policies accordingly. So any of the processes or the components of these software somehow has vulnerabilities, and then those vulnerabilities would compromise the server will be protected against those type of exploits. Again, I just want to emphasize AppGuard is not an exploit prevention. AppGuard is a zero trust, assumes exploits will take place regardless of what mechanisms you will have, and defend against the good systems that you think that they are good, but they always will have vulnerabilities. Again, and then when those vulnerabilities are exploited, it will not be able. Those vulnerable exploits will not be able to harm the underlying host, in this case, Windows servers. And out of the box, you have the ability to adapt to other type of web applications or web servers. So if you're running Apache or some other your own version of web application server, you have the ability with our management system to craft cookie cutter type of policies and deploy on servers. And the management system provides a extensive visibility into your servers with rich dashboards. You have the ability to collect threat intelligence, and you don't have to go and be reactive. You can stage your patches and everything, continue to defend your servers. By March of 2019, in a couple of months, we are going to be releasing our beta version for Linux, primarily for CentOS and Red Hat Linux initially, and it will be for early adapters, and we will have the GA of Linux product by June, July timeframe. There are some differences between the approaches, but the framework under which these systems are established for servers is very much similar, same patented technologies, but of course Linux has certain deviations on the policies. We are taking that into consideration. And one last thing I want to mention, you will be able to manage both AppGuard Server for Windows and AppGuard Server for Linux from a same unified management system.
Great. Fatih, thank you for that. Like I mentioned, we'll get this deck out to everybody, so everybody's got these data points, and these are these initial availabilities. There's also going to be other servers in your future based on client priorities. So I always like to make sure that we deliver a bunch of gold nuggets out to the folks that join these webinars. And Bob, I want to tap you on the shoulder again because what you said in the opening of this conversation was very interesting to me around, you looking at people's infrastructures and architectures and realizing that, even though they're seasoned professionals, they may or may not have done a good job of architecting it in the best way possible, right? So let's just say a client comes to you or a person comes to you and says, we know our server's been breached, right? What's your immediate kind of best practices of what they need to be doing to kind of fix the problem, correct the problem, not be so reactive, but really just move through that very seamlessly?
Well, you mentioned that if they know for a fact that their server's been breached, it's not going to be very seamless. Basically, I've been through this a number of times, and what we do is we basically rebuild the servers and do network monitoring to make sure that whatever attack succeeded won't attack again. And of course, on that checklist is upgrade server security. It's two things. It's build a hardened infrastructure, build a hardened build version of the operating system and then add a product like AppGuard Server to prevent those attacks from happening in the future.
Got it. Yep. No, I would say that nobody gets flood insurance until after the house is wet.
That's right.
Someone has told me before. But absolutely agreed. And I would say that as I was doing my research here for these 2,912 insurance claims, I would say probably 40% of them that I was reading through the actual incident responses were, that a hacker of some kind had taken control of a server, was leveraging ransomware to prevent access to that server any longer, and then ultimately was holding it ransom. And then at least another 20% of those, a company would pay the ransom. The hacker would then give 99% of the server back, and then ransom them again afterwards for more money. What are some of the other kind of, does that align with the things that you're hearing out there, Bob, or is there other ones that are just kind of to be aware of?
I think the ransomware issue is a little bit overplayed. I have had a couple clients where I've dealt with ransomware, but the primarily is what we're finding is, especially the sophisticated criminal gang hackers out of Russia and China. What they'll do is they'll attack servers, they'll steal credentials, and they'll move laterally and set up accounts for themselves on the server that have deep, really authentication protocols and privileges on the network to allow them to do and move anytime they want to other servers. So, the ransomware certainly is an issue. But the more insidious attack, the one that really worries me, is the one where the hacker implants both software and privileges on their systems that make it very difficult to find with the existing detection software, number one. And number two, even if you try to get to one or two servers, they've built backdoors into the network where they can come back in anytime they want. That's the attack. The ransomware gets lots of publicity because everyone understands it. Which is one of the reasons why they also use ransomware. But it's the one you really have to worry about is the deep and insidious, what they call slow growth attack, where they just slowly get into your network. And then one day they basically misuse it for something like the Swift attacks, which is exactly how that attack was executed.
Yep. Yeah, sure. No, absolutely. Great. Anything else come to mind that you can share with folks that they should be aware of in the industry today as it relates to server challenges, either pros or cons, from your end?
Yeah. The first thing you got to do is, and you're going to laugh when I tell you this, is turn off the vendor default accounts and passwords. So in over 60 assessments, I found those accounts on just about half of them.
Wow.
The next thing is to use a hardening standard, either a DISA hardening standard or the vendors hardening standard. All the vendors from Linux to Windows. I mentioned the Windows Secure Baseline Server. They have them for Linux as well. Use those to harden your server, which include turning off unnecessary services. You should also think about signing code that runs on your server, either with self-signed cert or root cert that you got from another company that you trust. And then, yes, of course, I would install server software, security software, and I would certainly recommend AppGuard.
Awesome. Well, thank you, and appreciate your sponsorship there. It is definitely helpful. Great. So we're coming down to the end of our webinar here. I wanted to suggest something just because we talked about it this morning on an internal call as we were preparing for this. This is obviously a new approach to cybersecurity. This is also a new approach to covering and protecting your servers. And I'm sure there are both technical and non-technical folks on the phone who are going, this all makes sense to me, but how do I start, or where do I get started from? And so we would obviously need to move through some kind of requirements gathering, a discovery session. But if there are folks on this call and this call only, this is the only time I will suggest this because it'll become overwhelming to us. But if there's an opportunity for us to provide a pilot to you and cover just a few of your servers, and it makes sense so that you can fundamentally understand how the technology works, reach out to us directly. We will not reach out to you on this, but you reach out to us and let us know that you're interested in deploying AppGuard Server on one or two or a handful of your servers, and we will have that conversation with you and see if it makes sense for us to facilitate that conversation and walk through a pilot conversation. Again, if anybody has any follow-up questions, please do ask them back. We will be sending a copy of the deck around to everyone who was on the list. And Fatih, do you have anything else to add? I didn't mean to take away your thunder. You're good? Awesome. Bob, any closing remarks on your end?
Nope, that's just thank you everyone for attending.
All right, thank you everybody, appreciate you. And finally, real quick before people sign off, in case you have not been on one of our past webinars, we are hosting a very intimate CISO hackathon in Miami on February 27th and 28th. We are bringing Eastern European penetration testers to attempt and to be defeated by AppGuard live for a 2-day event. We're going to have some penetration testing. We're going to have some other demonstrations. We're going to have a roundtable with industry leaders from Bank of Mellon, New York, the International Cruise Lines, Under Armour, Verizon, and a handful of other folks. So if you are interested in attending this event with us, please do shoot us an email. We will get you in touch with the right people on our side. And if you're looking to rub elbows with some of the industry leaders, do some networking, a roundtable about State of the Union, and also see how our AppGuard works, we'd love to have you on board. So have a great day, everybody, and stay safe out there.